wherever you want to be.
I can lean better here.
Okay, good.
But wow, what a nice welcome and an introduction, and what an assignment to cover all the territory out here that John has laid out for you. And I'll do my best on that. It was the way he said that we were talking about having a speech here, discussion about the restoration of Western civilization and the assaults on Western civilization. And so that's a lot of my history. I fought that battle for a long time. But when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, then that was a real kick in the guts to the United States of America, to Western civilization, especially to the young people in this country, a lot of whom looked up to Charlie Kirk. And I had Charlie Kirk as a guest speaker. They sent me a picture here just voluntarily the other day. It happened to be 2018 is when we brought Charlie in. I chaired the Conservative Opportunity Society in Congress for 16 years. And there, every Wednesday morning, we would have, I would get to select usually a high-profile speaker to come in and speak to 2 to 4 dozen members of Congress that morning. And I soon learned that if you're going to have them show up, if you want conservatives to show up down in Congress, you've got to serve grits for breakfast, because a lot of them come from south of the Mason-Dixon line. And so we had a hot breakfast, and a good number of people. I won't go through the list, but Charlie Kirk being among them. And I just recall him, first of all, his presence, 6'5", and just as clean and squared away as any individual you'd ever see anywhere. And of course, you all know now, just sharp as can be, with a retention capability that it's not only it's a deep, vast, and wide hard drive that he had in his brain, but he had instant access to the things that were relevant. And I've got to operate in a little bit different way than Charlie, because I'm simplex. I can either talk or hear, but I can't talk and listen at the same time. Charlie is duplex. He was duplex at least. He could talk, listen, and rationalize and calculate all at the same time, and pull the facts out and throw them in so they're relevant to, I'll say, redirect the conversation, or simply just solve the debate. And the times I've sat into the United States Supreme Court and listened to the arguments there, I always knew I was not the guy to argue the case before the Supreme Court, because the attorneys argue before the court, they'll be making their argument, and the justice over here is going to be asking them a question about the beginning of them giving their response over here. They have to process the question coming in this ear, get their answer out this ear, come back this way, and as soon as they start to answer, somebody else asks the question from here. I didn't see Charlie argue in that arena like that. Well, kind of I did on college campuses, but that's the skill set that is required before the Supreme Court. And I don't know anybody that had that skill set any better than Charlie Kirk. And so when the tragedy of his assassination hit, it did hit me just like getting kicked in the guts. I mean, the magnitude of it, the tragedy of it, the personal part of it. Yes, I got to call him a friend, not a close friend, but a friend. And that part hurt, of course, a lot. But I started to process what's happened to our country, and what does this mean? What's the impact of it? Maybe in this discussion, I'll get rolled around to providing some answers to that question in a way that's relevant in the context of history. But I just wanted to go back when John said, we were talking about assassinations, I thought, I better take a look at the assassinations in the world historically, going back a long ways, and those that are rather contemporary, at least in this past century or so in the United States. And you go to, of course, Julius Caesar. That was probably the most famous assassination ever, but I don't know if it weren't for Shakespeare if we would have heard very much about Julius Caesar, actually, but it dramatically changed the trajectory of the Roman Empire. And then you just go through, and some of these are important. I'll just name them. I won't go into them in detail, but Caesar, Lincoln, the most impactful assassination in our country. And then Archduke Ferdinand started that assassination, started World War I. Sarajevo actually went to that place where he was assassinated. I have a tendency to go to those places where things have happened in the world. It's just a desire to go there, stand on that ground, try to absorb what took place there that altered history for us, and say a prayer for our freedom. And so it's taken me to a good lot of places in the world, but that was one of them. And there, looking through the window, you can see the pistol that was used by his assassin. And you wonder how shooting the Archduke could have triggered a world war that killed millions of people. And I don't fully understand that, but it triggered it. Another one would be 1948, Mahatma Gandhi. That shifted things in India. But the one that I want to relate here to Charlie Kirk's assassination was that of Martin Luther King Jr. And think I'll just package that up and say, I'm going to compare those two assassinations, but first I want to go down through this list of the political assassinations that took place. And I did dig out a little bit of a list of that. I wrote it down somewhere. Oh yeah, this other side of pocket over here. Don't worry too much, I'm not going to read all this stuff to you. I don't make a habit of doing that, but I want to remember what was going on. And it looks like, here we go. Yeah, here we go. This is the, I just went through a list of the political assassinations that I knew of in contemporary time here. And John mentioned some of them. Trump certainly. He suffered 9 years of political assassination attempts. And it's not over yet, but I think he's going to win. And then, of course, Steve Bannon. And I worked with Steve Bannon going quite a long ways back before his name emerged. And then, can they hear me back there, John? Yeah. Okay, good. I worked with Steve Bannon before his name emerged, and so we were connected pretty well. Also with Andrew Breitbart, who was, he had a heart and a fire to fight. He was one of those conservatives that died at age 43, and we don't actually know the cause of death. I just know the family asked not to speculate on the cause of death. But I knew Andrew very well. In fact, I gave the keynote as eulogy, his memorial service in Washington, D.C., and I flew out to California for his funeral, which was very quick. But that was one of those people that left us too early, and Bannon was part of that team to pull that all together. And then Peter Navarro, he was one of my speakers. I worked with him in the West Wing of the White House on the trade issues. They destroyed his career, temporarily at least, and put him in prison. And he came back out now, and now he's still the trade representative for Trump, in whatever that title might happen to be. And you start thinking, how many of these people that were politically assassinated, how many of them actually gave up, curled up, went and holed up somewhere and decided to let life pass them by? I can't really find any of them that just sacked up their bats and went home and said, I've had enough, I can't take this abuse. So if these people that are perpetrating these political assassinations, this whole conglomerate of the media, the establishment, that if they have an objective, I think it works against them in the end. Mm-hmm. And Donald Trump is the very best example of that, but there are more. And so that was, Navarro's still there, Giuliani's still fighting. He took some of the hardest hits of all. I mean, it broke him. I remember listening to him in an interview, and he said, I don't have any credit cards, I can't call a cab, I don't have a cell phone that I can use, and he just was down to the end of his rope. Now, hopefully some of that's restabilized now. I understand it's starting in the right direction. But there's a guy that took a hard hit in the political assassination for being loyal to our president, for standing for what he believed in, for conducting his profession as a very sharp attorney, and he was targeted by lawfare. Now, these lawfare assassinations we've seen one after another like trip hammer blows coming against conservatives in this country. And Giuliani was one. General Flynn is another one. I do count General Flynn as a friend. And I'd had him speak before Conservative Opportunity. He brought his son Michael along with him that morning, as I recall. And stopped to see him in the West Wing of the White House shortly after the beginning of the first Trump administration. And see him today. What they've done with him is driven him out of office and targeted him for prosecution. And he essentially saw what was happening in the District of Columbia. The District of Columbia, when you get indicted in the District of Columbia, I will just say, no white man gets a fair trial there if you're a conservative. No conservative gets a fair trial there, sir. And I know it, General Flynn knew it, and they were also threatening to bring charges against his son, Michael, and that was happening kind of along the time that I was dealing with him, and he made a calculated decision to negotiate a plea agreement and for lying to the FBI, and then that let him get out of that trap in the District of Columbia by a plea bargain. I look at that and I think there's only one time in my life that I've ever compromised and backed away on a point of principle, and that was when the IRS came after me unjustly, and my business was just getting started there. They had audited me 2 years in a row, and I knew I was right, I knew they were wrong, but my calculation was, I can go to the bank and borrow the money to pay the IRS the money they don't deserve and I don't owe, or I can go to the bank and borrow the money to hire an attorney to fight against an IRS that I know I'm going to lose. So if I want to keep my business alive, I had to make that decision. That's pretty close to, I think, the calculation that General Flynn made. And then I think it was, I'll get back at you guys later. And I'm sure it was mine, too. So I think I understand General Flynn, and I admire that man. And then Roger Stone went through the same kind of grief. And it's curious, you know, I made the remark last night that if you're targeted by them, if you're in the spotlight, if you're in the heat of the criticism of the complex, as Andrew Breitbart described it, as the establishment, the uniparty machine that's there, if you think you're targeted by that, Roger Stone should have gone out and bought a pair of designer pajamas, so when they showed up at 5:30 in the morning with the C-SPAN lights already on and pounding on his door, bashing it in, at least they could have frog-marched him out of there looking cool. But that's how bad that is. C-SPAN knows about it. I said C-SPAN, I mean CNN. You all knew what I meant, I hope. CNN shows up with the lights, and then the FBI and the DOJ shows up to bash the door in if need be. Paul Manafort, also targeted, and his career knocked pretty hard down. Charges against him. Jeffrey Clark is still fighting back against this lawfare against him. And John Eastman, whom I talk to about every week, he's battling to try to hold his license together, and he's got other charges in 2 different states. The California bar has disbarred him. He's appealing it. One of the smartest, in fact, he's still my go-to constitutional scholar of all the nation, John Eastman. And he's just under this constant lawfare attack, holding his head up, fighting, keeping us connected, and he's still got attention span to push the right agenda and helpful to me. Sidney Powell's another one that I got to know, and she took a pretty serious beating and the charges brought against her. She seems to be the quietest now of those that have been targeted by lawfare. I did think she was a little out in front of her skis a bit, but I'd rather have them there than curled back in a fetal position and letting the world chew up our freedom. And so I do admire Sidney Powell. Lynn Wood, he was the attorney out of Georgia. I tried to get Lynn Wood to defend me in my copyright case, and he thought about it for a while, turned things around, and he was under a pretty heavy load, and I can see why he said he couldn't, because of all the heat they brought against him. So he stepped back and voluntarily given up his law license, as I recall. Jen Ellis is another one of those, same way. And then Alex Jones, you all know Alex Jones, what they've done to him. And I know Alex only a little bit, but I have done his program and I worked with him. And then Mike Lindell is almost my neighbor, crossed the border up into Minnesota, and he owns some land down in Armstrong, Iowa, where he goes down to hunt pheasants there. And we've joined together, not hunting pheasants, but a few times. And he put a lot of his treasure on the line because he knew the 2020 election was stolen. And they could not abide that. They could not let that happen. And so they more or less, they knocked his business down hard, and it's cost him millions of dollars. And there was a time where his ads were not going to go up on Fox even, because they decided that he was such a pariah, is my guess. I'm assigning them a belief that Dinesh D'Souza, he's had my back. He's been my speaker, but he's also had my back when the heat was on. He also was targeted. So they came up with 15 names. I just did some searches around and threw this all together. And I kind of asked, well, where's Steve King on this list of targeted political assassinations? And I'm down there probably 16th or below somewhere. There are those that are worse off than I am that I probably don't have in this list also. But one of them I want to say to you is Tina Peters out of Colorado. She was an election official, whatever their name for it is. We call it auditor in our counties in Iowa. And it would be the county of Colorado Springs. I draw a blank on the name of it. But in any case, so she was a top election official there. She sensed that the election was being stolen, and so she downloaded the actual election data as required by law and put it on a thumb drive, hung it around her neck. And when they got done auditing, or let me say amending the election results, she had the real facts around her neck. And then came the lawfare. And a Democrat state with Jared Polis, is that a Greek word, Polis? I'm just cheesing John a little bit. But I flirt with that guy too, and I'm not a fan of Jared Polis at all, but the heavy hand in there, he's a smart guy, he's shrewd, he's cagey, and he's merciless. And they took Tina Peters and took her apart and brought charges against her and convicted her on state charges. She turned 70 years old in a California state penitentiary just this year, and she's got 7 more years to serve on a term. She'll likely die in prison, and what she did was stand up for our rights, stand up for our constitutional rights and legitimate elections. And by the way, if you look at these people in this list that did that, look down through who else? Who did? Trump did, Bannon did, Navarro did, Giuliani did. I don't know for sure on Flynn. Yeah, Flynn did. Sure he did. I know he did. Stone, Manafort, all of these people, I don't think there's an exception in this list of people that I've listed here, the political assassinations, that weren't defending our elections and trying to bring integrity into the 2020 election. I think they all were targeted by that, which tells you how big and how corrupt that theft was. And at one time I could name you 7 or 8 different ways that they stole the election. They had a lot of different tools to play, but what was it, 5 different states stopped voting or stopped counting at 1:30 in the morning. One of them couldn't count because they had a water leak, a tragic water leak. When you think the building went underwater, you know, somebody flushed a roll of toilet paper down and it ran out on the floor. And you know, as I told John last night, I said, if I have guests at my house and the toilet plugs up, we don't send them home. Just go down with the plunger and, okay, fine, we're good to go. And but that shut down the election. I had my legislative director went to Pittsburgh in 2020 to be an election observer. She's a lawyer and entirely qualified and smart and honorable. And she said, I saw pallets of ballots come in with no justification of where they came from. And that they wouldn't let them get within 20 feet of a ballot. I've heard numbers as far as 100 feet of a ballot, but you can't read a ballot from 20 feet either. And I don't know that they had put the covers up over the glass, but she was not able to observe anything except those push forklifts coming in with pallets of ballots on them. And but she said she grew up there in Allegheny County. Pittsburgh matches up with Moning County in Ohio. She said all of her life that those 2 counties have voted the same for president. They might go for the Democrat one time, the Republican the next time, but they voted the same because they're identical politically, they're identical demographically, they're industrial, their professions are the same, they're just a match, they're bookends with a river in between is what they are. But she said this one in 2020, it was entirely different. Trump carried Moning County in Ohio by 7 to 8 points, and Biden carried Allegheny County by a landslide. And she said, Congressman, that just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. Well, it did happen, but it doesn't happen organically by the votes of we the people. That happens because they set this thing up to steal the election and proceeded to do so. I'll go off on a little piece of I'll say a quasi-tangent here, but when Trump overcame the resistance against him in 2016 and surprised them about by winning the election in 2016, the Democrats had the Occidental Mandarin Hotel in Washington, D.C. already reserved, the whole hotel. And they started checking in on that Sunday afternoon after Trump was elected. And they had it from Sunday until Wednesday. Well, they reserved it for the purpose of planning how they were going to exploit their anticipated Hillary Clinton presidency. And but they had to change their agenda. And George Soros was the lead. And it wasn't just me saying that. He was on the front page of Politico. And so out of that came when they changed their agenda to go after the Trump administration. And so after the election, you saw major demonstrations in almost every major city in America against Trump. They triggered those out of there. They launched them, they called them, and they funded a lot of them. I don't know if they funded them all, but I expect they did. And all the way up, weekend after weekend, all the way to the inauguration. So in Trump's first inauguration, January 20th of 2017, I was there in that city, of course, and they flooded that city with 1 million, mostly women, in those silly pink hats they knitted, some of them on the way. And you couldn't hardly drive anywhere. They were beating on our car with signs. Some of the most foul-mouthed women I've ever been around in my life. Well, the most foul-mouthed, actually. And so they were not their image of America that I'd like to see building our nation and our culture. But so as we're trying to drive through this, and my wife said, just step on it. We had our driver at that time. And I said, no, we don't need that problem. We'll work slowly. But anyway, I had heading to eat all day, and I didn't think I should be sending staff on missions. But right before we went to the last reception, it was across the street from the McDonald's. And I just thought, I'll just go in there and get a burger, and nobody will know me. And I'll get that burger and eat, and then I'll go across to the reception. I walked into McDonald's, and there must have been 150 women in there in those pink hats. And I got my hamburger ordered, and they recognized me just right away. And so after a little while, they all surrounded me, come around me, and they're all yelling and cussing and asking me questions. And so I just thought, okay, I need to be a Virgil pugilist here, and I'll just fight them off until they're done. And so I stood there with my back to the wall, and they were just, it was like oh, Linda Blair and The Exorcist, I guess, watching those faces screaming at me. And, but I stayed there and just pounded against them until all of them gave up. And I finally got my cold hamburger and a couple bites of that. But I learned in that, a lot of them were flown in, places like Arizona, for example. Complained to me they couldn't afford their Obamacare premiums. How'd you afford the plane ticket? Well, somebody else bought it for me. Who? I don't know. But that's just a little piece of knowing what's happening here. The funding that's coming. Soros put $18 billion into a foundation, and then he threads that out through NGOs, of which there are something like 152 of them that have formed since 1950 or so. And almost all of them are leftist organizations, 501c3s, and they're sucking down our tax dollars with appropriations that are filtered through USAID. And then the Tides Foundation is kind of a center hub for much of the money that's brokered there, or that's distributed out to these organizations. And by the way, I had a sleuth that was working for me, and well, he was a volunteer that worked for me, and he assigned me, and I took his advice actually, to go out to California and stick my nose into the Tides Foundation. So I flew out there one weekend and went to their headquarters. They didn't have a shop open, but I did like the spy. I walked around with my 35mm camera and took a lot of pictures through the windows. I didn't really get anything of value, but it anchored for me what that operation is, the Tides Foundation. And the Open Societies Foundation funds it, and then it spreads out in other places. Other funding comes into it. But this is a network that we're facing here that is big, and it's heavy, and it's complex. And so the people who have been victimized by political assassination almost universally rise back up again and engage in the fight. And I'm among those people. And it was it wasn't a hit like Trump has taken, but I just give you the quick version of that so you hear it from me. And then the details are in my book better than I can probably explain them here this morning. But when I went to Congress, I didn't owe anybody anything. I'm just arrogant enough to believe that, well, I did. I owed you all my best effort, my best judgment. But nobody wrote a check that I thought bought my vote. It might rent my attention for a little while, a little bit different, but nobody ever wrote me a check that bought my vote. I thought when they wrote me a check, it was an endorsement of my judgment. Shouldn't we all be thinking like that if you're serving in office, that you collect money so that you can run ads and get elected to office? That don't they write you a check because they trust your character, Kerry, and they endorse your judgment, and then you ought to have free reign to just go full bore with your judgment and your convictions that you've advertised in order to raise the money to get elected to office. But there's other folks that write those big checks. They think that they actually have bought your vote. And so, let's see, how do I begin with this part? I had, for a long time, I had gone to C-SPAN and done C-SPAN speeches night after night. I didn't think we should ever let that screen go blank. If there's time to speak to the American people through C-SPAN, sometimes 100,000 people are watching that. That's a pretty good crowd. And so I would go down there continually and just pound away. And there were things that I believed in that I made pretty straight and sure about. And one of them was we ought to just seal the border, and we don't need to have any illegal immigration in this country. Get that to zero, and deport everybody that's in here illegally, every last one. We can't have a sympathy factor, or it destroys the rule of law.
Amen.
And another factor is if you bring people in from another culture, if you bring one person in from another culture, it's invariable that you are importing their culture. They can't separate themselves from their home culture and walk over here and put on the cloak of being an American culture. They can assimilate to it, and if they want to, they can assimilate more quickly than if they resist it, of course. But if you bring in one person that way, eventually they're assimilated. It probably doesn't take very long. And then on down the line. But the bigger the group is, the harder it is. And when I was young, my grandmother came from Germany. My father grew up in a German-speaking home. And he went to school in kindergarten. That was a German word, by the way. He probably thought he knew where he was going and he was going to understand what was going to get said in there. But he went to kindergarten speaking only German, and he came back home and said hello to his mother in German. And she turned to him and she said, "Emmett, speaking German in this household is for you from now on verboten. I came to America to become an American. I came here to become an American. That means speaking English, and you will go to school, and you will learn English, and you will bring it home, and you will teach it to me." That went into my ears from little on up, And it was a component of the assimilation that brought America to the greatness that we remember in our past. And the greatness that won 2 world wars, the greatness that held us together through thick and thin, made us the industrial power of the world, and let us assimilate people from all over the world, especially if they shared our values of faith and free enterprise and Western civilization. And so, that's kind of the background that got me started in this. But I would go out instead, close the border, build a wall. I got a call the other day, when did I first advocate for a 2,000-mile wall? And so, well, I'll go look. So I went back through YouTube. I just typed in my name and immigration, and up came a bunch of them. But one of them was where I went to the floor of Congress, and I was hearing from people like Paul Ryan, you can't build a wall, it's too hard. The desert has got, you know, you've got mountains, and you've got a river, and it's hot, and the toad's got to hop across the border, and all that stuff. And, you know, he comes from a construction family. Hard for me to believe that he thinks it's too hard to build that wall. So I thought, they don't really understand. These people come from places where they don't work with their hands, and so they don't understand. So we went to the lumberyard and got some tongue and groove siding, and cut it in chunks about like that, painted it flat gray so it looked like concrete, built kind of a little fake foundation out of 1x2s, put it in a cardboard box. I went to the floor of Congress and I set it out there, and I go, you think it's hard to build a wall? Here, I'll show you how. So I set the foundation in there, tell them about that. Then I pick up these pieces, one after another, and put them in. I practiced it in my office. And so I had them numbered because they didn't fit perfectly. But anyway, I put them in, like, I don't know what it'd be, that long, 1x6s, to show them. Now here's the wall. It's that easy. You pick up the precast right off the truck, put it in there with the crane, that's it. And if you take it out, you can do the same thing. But you're going to say that they're going to crawl over the top of this wall. And one of my jokes was, well, if you have a 10-foot wall, they'll have a 12-foot ladder. Well, okay, but we'll dig a 2-foot hole on the other side. That'll fool them. No, so I took a roll of solder that's on spool. You pull it out, it's like a slinky toy. And I set that in the top of that wall, and I go, we have to put a little wire on top of this wall to provide a current for a deterrent. And I got accused of wanting to electrocute Mexicans. It was a terrible racist thing to try to keep people from breaking into your country, you know. But I saw the other day that Kristi Noem, whom I couldn't get interested in immigration when she was in Congress with me, she is riding a little four-wheeler alongside part of the wall that's been built, and that wall looks a lot like the one I built on the floor of Congress 20 years ago. So okay, it takes a long time to get through to these people, but people didn't like that. They wanted open borders. The Bush administration wanted open borders, and people that just wanted abortion, and I fought that like crazy with the heartbeat bill, which we've succeeded now in about 16 states. And then John mentioned the sodomist lobby. When the Obergefell decision came down, the gay marriage decision came down, I'd already fought that in Iowa. Our Iowa Supreme Court had issued a ruling, Barnum v. Brian, that commanded that there would be all marriage, same-sex marriages be recognized in Iowa by all county recorders and all the law in Iowa. And it was an outrageous decision because it wasn't based on anything constitutional, and in fact it overturned our Defense of Marriage Act, which I had helped craft back in '98 or something. And so these 7 judges, 3 of them were up for retention. And so we got down to the end of that 2010 campaign, and we had 6 figures money sitting in my account, and I thought, what are we going to do with this? There was about 2.5 weeks left. Well, so I asked my staff, what can we do here? And they go, we don't know. And I said, let's put it all in on the judges, against these 3 judges for retention. And they said, my chief of staff said, it's illegal, you can't. And I said, well, you've got an hour to show me the statute. We're going to write a commercial and get it on the air. So 2 other guys and I went to the studio, we wrote a commercial, put it up on the air, and they never found a law that said it was illegal. And so we put, on every radio station in the state of Iowa. We weren't the only ones. We bounced them off the court, 3 of them face planted by the time the votes were counted that night. 3 justices that thought that, here's a quote from that decision, homosexuals have a right to public affirmation. And I asked myself, did Jesus have a right to public affirmation? Does anybody have a right to public affirmation? What kind of a ridiculous thinking is this? So I'm glad they're gone. They went back into history. And then they told me that when the Obergefell decision came down, I got a podium and big old speakers and went over and stood in front of the Supreme Court building and just let them have it. And I thought other members of Congress would show up to tag team with me. Nobody. And my staff told me, I wasn't paying attention, they told me no other member of Congress stood up against Obergefell in that same-sex marriage decision but me. And I didn't do that because I wanted to be a lone wolf. It's just a conviction. It was not a constitutional decision, whatever your thoughts are on the morality of it or lack of same. But when they're not basing their decisions rooted in the language and the original understanding of the Constitution, we got to call them out. And we did call them out in the Kelo decision also, about that would be about 2005 and 6. Property rights decision, when John Paul Stevens wrote the 5-4 split decision that even though the Constitution says, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation, public use, that word, well, it needed to be a little broader for the application in the Kelo decision. So we're gonna add to public use, we're gonna add the word public purpose. And public purpose is so broader and squishier. That way they could get the city of New London, Connecticut to confiscate Suzette Kelo's house and her neighbor's house so they could build a shopping mall. And once that came down, now look what we've got going on all over this country. And I'm fighting that day and night to get that decision reversed. As Scalia said, it was an erroneous decision and it would be reversed one day. So those are some of the reasons why they went after me. They didn't like somebody speaking out against the LGBTQ alphabet infinity caucus or lobby. They wanted open borders. They wanted to have abortion free and unfettered and unbarriered by any moral arguments that we might make. And so with all of that put together, plus Iowa being the first in the nation caucus, and I representing the most conservative district in Iowa, of which 4 is all we have, that put me in a position to have a lot to say about who would come out of the Iowa caucus and go to New Hampshire looking for a victory in New Hampshire. And so all of that were reasons that are in my book, and you'll read that, I hope. But there's another reason on top of that, and it's tied in with this, and that is that this Kelo decision has opened things up to a point where the effort to capture the CO2 coming out of our ethanol plants and pipe it up to North Dakota and sequester it in foundations down 6,000 feet, formations 6,000 feet, and cash a check from our federal government, our taxpayers, for $85 a metric ton, has driven a boondoggle that seeks to put the 2,500 miles of pipeline through some of the best farmland in the world with eminent domain. So you know where I am on that fight. It's a constitutional issue. I'm a former chairman of the Constitution Committee. I've taken the oath, I think it's to be 12 times, I think is what it works out to be. Yeah, 12 times. And just a lot of you have taken an oath to the Constitution. And there's a reason why you put your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand. So you can see this hand here, and it's your promise to God. This is kind of your promise to man. But there's a reason why you have to have this hand here and this hand here, and that's because that way no hand is free to cross your fingers behind your back when you take the oath to the Constitution. And I have seen so many cavalier oaths to the Constitution, and I'd like to dress them down. But so that's kind of how this all came at me to get me canceled. But the reason that I wrote a little sequel I put in the book. It's only a page and a half, because you deserve to be able to read what I learned after we published my book. And that is that the people that schemed to do the political assassination against me were the ones that are in the process of trying to build this pipeline. And I did not realize that. My thick skull did not think like crooks and thieves do. And so I wasn't able to process it. But then when they started pushing for eminent domain, and in my battle to defend the constitutional rights of people, because that's where my head and heart is, not for any money, by the way. In fact, it's been the other way for me. But I went to the hearings of the Iowa Utilities Commission, 3 of them appointed, to listen to all the people plead that they can keep their land. And a lot of tears were shed. I'm sitting there and listening to the witnesses, and I'm looking around. The people that are working for the pipeline, they're the people that have worked for Bruce Rastetter, who is the lead of this. And I've been on the good side of those guys, that whole group of people, because they wanted me elected to Congress. That's fine. I'm in a tough race. So I know how their operation works, and I know who they are. Governor Branstad, the former longest seated governor in the history of America, I've worked with him because he was my governor while I'm a state senator and as I'm a congressman. And so I know Branstad's people. I know the current Governor Reynolds' people because I helped get her into office. So I'm on I know the side of these three entities, the pipeline people, the governor who is the former governor who is the senior policy advisor for the pipeline, and Governor Reynolds, who would just last May veto our bill that would have protected the property rights. I know these people. I know how it works on that side. And of course, I'm on the other side of that now. And I'm watching. People, as they came through, they're the same people that, what about, well, because my staff actually, they put together a poster that was called the pictures of all the people that unloaded on me in the first, say, week of that broadside, the public lynching. They brought the media against me everywhere. And so they the poster of the pictures. And that's all framed in my mind. And so I see these people walking around here. Well, that one's on the list of the unforgiven. That one's on the list of the unforgiven. Here's another one. Is there a pattern here? And I tried to think of what would be the exceptions to that pattern. And I really couldn't come up with one because I kept seeing more and more people that had been stabbing me in the back that were supposedly my friends before. They're all pushing this pipeline. And then I asked myself, what would I be doing if I were a seated member of Congress right now? Would I be sitting here in these hearings? No. I'd be doing town hall meetings. I'd be doing public interviews. I'd be giving floor speeches. I'd be introducing legislation and telling the world what a big boondoggle this is. And I'd be calling out each of the governors in the 3 to 5 affected states. What's your position on property rights? Each U.S. senator in those states, each of the congressional delegations in those states, the governors, and the legislative leadership, I would call them all out. And there'd be no way that they wouldn't be held accountable to defending property rights, because that's a 90% issue in our state right now. We've taken it to 90%. And yet they knew that because they'd seen me make this Kelo decision. So that's the big reason why they had to get me out of the way. Hundreds of billions of dollars, in fact, extrapolate somewhere like $1.2 to $2 trillion over time is what they will suck out of our pockets if we let them do this in this huge boondoggle. And so with that kind of money, I guess I should say that I'm probably, there have been cheaper ways to get rid of me. I'm not done. I'm still in the middle of this, and we've got a reasonable chance to beat them. So that's a little bit of the history side of this thing. And but the assassinations, the political assassinations, are almost more horrible than the physical assassinations, because it's so far as the breadth of it. It's endemic and it sends messages. And so do the physical assassinations, of which we've gone through a few of them. But so what's the motive of this? And I would just take this back to, well, it's Western civilization. Yes, we are the target of it, but it's the red-green axis versus we, the people, in the end. And I remember I helped a fellow a little bit with a book called, let's see, I have to remember the name of it. It was Shadow World, by Colonel Robert Chandler, and he was a Cold Warrior for 45 years, an Air Force colonel, Cold Warrior, Europe, behind the Iron Curtain part of the time, and he watched this all unfold and put together over 8 years a chronicle of the left and how they formed together, how they broke apart, and when the Soviet Union imploded, what happened to their leftists there. When Brazil collapses, what do those leftists do? They don't go away and lick their wounds, and they don't embrace free enterprise. They just reform in another way. And so he wrote about all of that. And in the beginning of chapter 4, he says there was a bog sat at the Army-Navy Club. That's a bunch of guys sitting around a table, a bog sat. And I've actually sat at that table with some of those people at the Army-Navy Club. But Paul Nitze was the father of the mutually assured destruction strategy, the nuclear deterrent strategy, the MAD strategy we called it. And he was at the table too. So these Cold Warriors, at the end of the implosion of the Soviet Union, had gathered together to celebrate their victory in the Cold War over the Soviet Union. And so as they raised their glasses to toast and celebrate, Paul Nitze, the father of the MAD theory, deterrent theory, he said, just a minute. Don't be too quick to celebrate. The world will never tolerate a lone superpower. Nobody likes the big kid on the block. And soon the envy will cause them to form against us. And you're likely going to see a group of Russia itself, China, and a large Islamic country, and perhaps India, will form against us to push back against us because they despise our ideology and they don't like the big kid on the block. Well, we know that Russia, China, and Iran today, that's quite a while ago now, 33 years or so ago, but Russia, China, and Iran have now for 2 years or more been doing large military operations with each other. So we're always going to be fighting these leftists, these Marxists, and I wanted to just give some more foundation on who they are and how they think and what they do. Does the name Antonio Gramsci ring anybody's bell in here? Okay, I see heads nodding around here. That gives me encouragement, and I know that you're more astute than the regular group. That's a certain evidence of it, actually. And when I started paying attention to Gramsci, I took my wife down to a beach in the Caribbean for a week, and I had 5 inches of Gramsci's writings, his prison notebook and other stuff. And so I just sat there in a chair on the beach for a whole week and read through all of that fine print stuff, trying to absorb all I could, because and when you read through that, there's a brilliance in this man. But he was the president of the Communist Party in Italy from 1919 until 1926. And and just remember, during that period of time, from the end of World War I through the 20s and the 30s and into the Second World War and beyond, the clash there was between the communists and the fascists, or the communists and the Nazis, which is just another form of fascism. And so Mussolini was pushing his fascism as an antidote to the communists that were trying to take over. And Gramsci was the chairman of the Communist Party. So Mussolini put him in prison, and that's where he wrote his prison notebook. But what he did was, he was critical of Marx. And he said Marx was really wrong, that he said that the proletariats will rise up against the bourgeoisie and take over everything and nationalize all the property, and everybody from each according to his ability to each according to their needs. And we know that that just destroys anybody's ambition. He should have been smart enough to figure that out and never write it. And millions of people should have been smart enough to reject it as being completely illogical if you know anything about human nature. But that was Marx's approach. And Gramsci I think he was a lot smarter than Marx, in my opinion. And so he began talking and deliberating about what does it take to actually rise up against the capitalism. How do you actually form a communist state? You've got to win the people over. And how do you do that? Do you say, well, you're a part of the proletariats, and so you need to all rise up together? That doesn't resonate with people. They have to have something in common. So he wrote, I had from memory that he wrote, well, the printers need to band together, and then the butchers need to band together. And so I went and looked, and also he included that the metal workers need to be this group here, the textile workers over here, mechanics here, carpenters there, shoemakers, tailors, clerks, and teachers, all in your own little group. And then gin up your grievances, because surely you can identify grievances if all the carpenters are in a room. Who is it you don't like? And well, it's going to be a member of the bourgeoisie somehow. So the carpenters would bundle together, and they would be the equivalent of one of those sticks in Aesop's fable, when the father called his sons in and said, here, break this stick. And they all could break the stick. Then he bundled them together and said, break the bundle. And they couldn't break the bundle. That's the metaphor that I would use to describe Gramsci's thinking, which was get people to identify themselves as victims groups, and each of those victims groups, once they're organized, then you add them to the bundle, so that the printers, the butchers, the metal workers, and the clerks and the teachers all are in one big bundle, a big grievance group. Call that the Democratic Party today, the grievance group. And they've got a grievance group for everybody. And so I noticed this first in 2010, when I had to go back and look and see what I had said about it. I knew what I'd said, but I had to find it to see if it was real. And anyway, I looked at the website. I represented Iowa State University in Ames, fairly conservative Regent University by reputation. But I went to the website and I started to look what was going on there. And they had 59 grievance groups on campus, registered in 2010. And it started with the Asians, alphabetically listed, and actually ended with Zeitgeist, A to Z, 59 victims groups, grievance groups. And so I gave a speech about that, and I talked about what it would be like to be a freshman in college. Say you're getting your own jalopy and you're getting all your clothes and some books or whatever you're bringing with you in your computer. You got to park as far away from the dorm as anybody can, because you're one of the freshmen. And then you're going to trundle your luggage down across the parking lot. Figuratively speaking now, just imagine 59 card tables. And there's the Asians here, the Zeitgeisters over here, and everybody else in between. Would you trust your daughter or your son to walk down through there and not find a card table that identified them as a victim and identify with that grievance group? That's really hard to do. If you're wide-eyed freshman, you're looking for associations, looking to bond with somebody, and it isn't just a lineup like that. I mean, that's figuratively speaking, but they're out recruiting all the time, 59 of them. And so then I just checked here just recently, within the last couple of weeks or so, that number's gone to 112 grievance groups. So the reason I have all this paper here is I printed them out because I just thought it'd be good to mention a few of them. It does start with African Students Association, and then goes on down. Actually, there's 27 of these organizations that are for blacks. And then you've got the Asians, of course, and you've got the black women engineers.
That's two people.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know which restroom they go to, but that's, and so on down, just there's well, I don't know if it's worth even going into this, but once you read it and you realize that there's now 112, and this isn't Berkeley, this isn't Harvard, this is Iowa State University. Women of Color Collective supports women of color with empowerment workshops. I don't want to just, that's not, I've got one or two others here that I thought, well, this is one. Society, this is one I said actually. Society of Women Engineers, SWE, diversity focus, empowers women of color in engineering. Well, that's, okay, I could go down through and tell you the Asians and the Sikhs and all those that are in there too. But there's something there for everybody. And they're all victims. And so, I would take you back to Pete Hegseth's speech. And how many people saw his speech that he gave before his officers? And it was maybe the best speech I've ever heard. 45 minutes long, and it took me a good hour and a half because I kept reeling it back in. Did I really hear that? Did he really say that? But he essentially said, we're going to revoke woke, and no more weirdos and no more beardos, and no more fat guys. If you don't want to shave, you can join the Special Forces, or go find something else to do. And you're always going to be able to button your uniform because you're going to go to PT every morning, just like the rest of us. If your secretary can do it, you can do it. Somebody remarked that at the end of that speech, when he walked out, there wasn't any applause. I'd say military discipline then, okay? But what he's doing to the military, we need to do to America.
Amen.
And we can do a lot of that under the name of Charlie Kirk. That's really where I'm heading with this, is that I watched a lot of his speeches, of course, a lot of them since he was killed, but I followed him moderately prior to that, and of course, his personal knowledge of him. And I asked myself, did I ever hear Charlie Kirk say anything that Jesus wouldn't have said? Now that's a great big question, and it puts you on the verge of saying that he was a deity, and of course I don't believe that he was immortal. But when you draw that comparison, I can't think of anything Charlie Kirk said that I would say Jesus would not have touched that topic. And he didn't even go so far as throwing the money changers out of the temple. So I'm really thankful that Jesus gave us that example of righteous anger. There's a time for righteous anger, and he knew what time that was, and he made the whip and drove him out. But Charlie Kirk has that persona with him. He was patient. He always respected people. He had that little smile. Laid the microphone down when it's time to listen. He picked it up, and they knew it was time to listen to him. Back and forth, and operated with duplex. But the morality that comes through out of Charlie Kirk. And so I would say of the assassinations that we've had in this country, and of course there have been a string of them that are too many. It had been a long time since we had an assassination of that magnitude. And at first day, I judged it as the assassination of Charlie Kirk was on an order of magnitude of that of Martin Luther King Jr. And I remember what happened then with King. And that is, the left was hijacking his movement before he was assassinated. I remember there was discussions in the living room. Actually, my father picked it up and talked to me about it. I probably wouldn't have noticed back in those years. But they were hijacking it, and John F. Kennedy in '62, I believe it was, maybe '63, and then later on in '64, Lyndon Baines Johnson, both filed executive orders that directed affirmative action. Kennedy recommended it, Johnson commanded it. So we had an executive order that acts on affirmative action ever since then. And they build on it. and when King was assassinated, then they accelerated it. So we had equal opportunity, content of character, a magnificent dream coming out of Martin Luther King, all while the left is hijacking that dream and turning it into a grievance formula for America. And then, so throughout that period of time, these leftist organizations kept filing themselves for everyone, there's probably, I'm going to say 7 or 8, maybe 10 or 12 leftist organizations for every conservative organization that has been formed during that period of time. And our funding is a lot different. I did a little search in this. Are there any conservative organizations that are drawing down taxpayer dollars? And the only answer I could give was, yeah, they're 501c3s. It's not really the same, but as far as appropriations through USAID or something, none. It all goes to the left, all the funding to the left. So through this period of time, in the aftermath of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., these 112 grievance groups formed on campus at Iowa State, and probably many more of them formed across the country and universities along the way. If we'd add them all up, I never did a search on that, but it would be a lot. And so, our kids in school, they're being fed this. I might have a godson that came home from school. He's about 10 years old at the time. And he had a little note. He was supposed to answer it, and it said, are you a boy, a girl, or something else? 10 years old, and our suggestion, you may not be one of these others, so what are you? Well, that kid was raised right, so he wrote down, I'm a purple kangaroo. I mean, if you can change your mind on the way to and from the bathroom, you can be a purple kangaroo. If you can be a cat and they bring you a litter box in school, even happens in my state, you can be a purple kangaroo. Yeah, so that's how bad that is. They're getting kids to question things they don't have any mental capacity to evaluate, and they pump it into themselves from little on up, from preschool on up. Drag queen shows in our public libraries to indoctrinate kids into homosexuality, and then we see these assassins that come out, and how many of them are trans of some form or another? An emerging group of them are, and to engrave Antifa language on shell casings, well, actually, and shell casings, and to send a message when you shoot somebody or shoot at somebody. And Antifa, I didn't bring that in either. That is the formation of Antifa back during that same era ran concurrently with Antonio Gramsci. They were the enforcement arm of the communists back then, and their flag it's a black flag over a red flag, or a red flag over a black flag, depending on which way they want to emphasize. But the black flag is anarchy, and the red flag is communist. We have them today penetrating through this country, and they'll be demonstrating in this country today in multiple locations, calling this the No More Kings Day or the No Kings Day. I resent that. I personally resent that. Amen. And so does my whole family, by the way. And so I always say more kings. We can't have too many of us. But no kings. So yeah, this is personally offensive today. But it's going to be the biggest demonstration they've done in a long time. They have cranked this up. They have, but Antifa is a big piece of it. And I'm just going to bring this together because I know that we're getting close here. But Antifa is a big piece of this. They formed to be the enforcement arm of the communists in the 20s and 30s. And the Nazis formed to be the antithesis of Antifa, well, actually the communists and Antifa. And out of that, we got the Nazis as the lesser of two evils. They thought at the time, at least the conservatives in Germany thought that. And now here we are today. They've never let up. They're still driving. They'll never give up. But we've got to transform this culture. And we've got to do it a piece at a time. We've got to eradicate all these grievance groups, get rid of them. We've got to say to our kids growing up, just suck it up, Buttercup. You're a gift from God, and all the talent He gives you is your job to take that, develop it, and do it for the best thing you can to glorify Him with what He gives you. And so it's not complicated, but we have to be tenacious. We have to know Shea Hostin. We have to know thine enemy. And it's one of the things that I hope I've conveyed here this morning is that we have a global mass of enemies lined up against us, and it's good versus evil. And it's freedom versus totalitarianism. It's a controlled economy of Marxism, communism, socialism versus free markets. It's Western civilization against the world. And we've got a lot to be proud of. We've accomplished a lot. In fact, civilization, I would say, as we know it, would not exist had it not been for Western civilization. And so I stand up for it. I'm going to continue to fight for it. Our constitutional rights and those principles, our biblical values, and the foundations that bring the morality that holds our Constitution together and this country together. So thanks for your attention here this morning. Appreciate you.